I'm really excited. Today I have my lovely friend, Lily Joy, here with me.
Hi, my name is Lily Joy Winder. I'm a genetic and soil review activist. I just finished my undergrad at Stanford. Now I'm working my master's at Stanford in their Earth Systems program. Today we're talking about Indigenous leadership. We're talking about how Indigenous people can give us the blueprint for the future using what has worked in the past, which I'm really excited about because a lot of people are like, what's the answer, what's the solution, what's next? And Indigenous people, we have what's next because we know what has worked. And so if we can bring that to the current moment that we're in, there's a lot of stability that can be found in what has worked in the past. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have to fund the wheel that Indigenous people are desperately clinging on to and have been desperately clinging on to for centuries at this point.
I think a lot of people are feeling like for the first time an impending sense of doom because of climate change or politics or whatever it is. There's this fantastic point that's been made, which is that Indigenous people have had apocalypses.
Yes.
Like worst case scenarios have come to pass. And especially the past couple generations have been reconstituting culture, language, craft, food systems, politics, and designing a vision for how to bring the past into the future. And so there's a very immediate blueprint right here for us to use for how we can survive worst case scenarios that I think a lot of Western people, a lot of people who have lived relatively privileged lives, it feels insurmountable to look at the current moment we're in and imagine what comes next.
I talk to Indigenous people, I talk to Indigenous women who are hungry for the moment that we're in. That's what gives me hope for this moment, is that we aren't lost, we just need some redirection.
Yeah, it's drive. You could also say this about enslaved Black people in the United States.
Yes.
Like, the worst has come to pass, and there's persistence, and there's still joy, and there's still culture, and children to raise, and weddings to have, and things to do.
Indigenous people, we have stories about the past of worlds ending and us being pulled into new worlds. And so we've had different layers of the world and we've come into and emerged into new moments. And that's how I perceive the moment that we're in right now.
The stakes are high. The stakes are high.
Extremely high. I think that people are ready for Indigenous leadership because we are experts in apocalypses. Right now we're coming into an apocalypse moment where everything feels like it's tumbling down. And in many ways it is. Our institutions that have failed us are crumbling. And Indigenous people are ready to meet the moment that we're in because we have been prepared by other moments where we have felt like the world is falling apart. Because it has. Indigenous people have seen this land since time immemorial. America's very young.
Right.
America's been here for 200
right.
years. We're talking about oceans rising. When we look even at the tribes of the Bay Area, the Muwekma people, they have completely seen the land change over so many different times.
There have been lakes that have been completely drained.
Yes.
That people built their lives around.
Yes. And then they were like, okay, this lake is no longer here. What's next? Native people, we do not roll over and die. In fact, the United States tried to do that. The laws and everything in relationship to tribes are so messed up because when the founding fathers made them, they had the understanding that Indigenous people were going to go extinct. And that's why so much of our infrastructure for tribes is so insufficient, because America was not built for Indigenous people to still be around.
I spend so much time looking at the projections for 2050, for 2100, and trying to look beyond in terms of carbon emissions, extreme heat, etc. So much of my work and the work of the climate sector, the climate movement, is just trying to preemptively design best case scenarios for the future.
Yes.
You guys have done that. And we're looking at like mass migrations out of the Indian subcontinent because of extreme heat making it inhabitable. And we're like, how do you keep cultures intact? How do you keep languages intact? How do you keep families and communities intact? The people who are native to America or the Americas have been forced to go through that.
Very recent history. Indigenous people have made so many wins. It's only been 100 years since even Indigenous people have been considered citizens of the United States, and we have won back our right to religion. We have built up so many of our languages. You also have to think about how quickly our turnaround has been. Like, I am a master's student at Stanford University. My grandparents...
Speak on it.
My grandparents were forced to go to residential schools, had their hair cut, had their language forcibly taken from them at school. And then they went back home. They used whatever that they could, continued to speak the language, had their 8 kids, and those kids all went to college. That's just a micro example of Indigenous people. You can't get rid of us. We're gonna keep getting smarter and better and sharper. You need people that are gonna meet the moment and say, I've seen worse. Indigenous people are also fighting to have a seat in this moment. You would think that people who have been so oppressed by this country would just be like, hey, I'm done. You're on your own. You deal with this mess that you've made. We're gonna keep working at this because we believe about creating right relations with the land and the people around us. You take the Yurok, for example. There has just been a very historic dam removal where the Yurok people in Northern California fought like hell to have these dams removed in the Klamath River. It was the biggest dam removal in history. At the time when people were protesting for it, everyone was saying this is impossible.
How long ago was this?
This dam removal happened a few years ago. And today, friends of mine that are Yurok were talking about how there would just be piles of rotting salmon belly up before the dam removals.
Okay.
Now, salmon are coming back to this area and they're able to make their traditional runs, and there's people coming back to their traditional food systems, and that's such a tight turnaround from residential schools that happened less than 100 years ago.
We've overfished the world's oceans. 80% of the world's fish stocks have been depleted. And we know for a fact that we're pretty much going to run out of seafood by the year 2050. And that is a problem for so many reasons, ecosystems, et cetera, but it also means like you just won't be able to get fish. You just won't. And so it's like, you can choose to listen to Indigenous people about the dam and the need for the salmon run, or you can give up your favorite food. It's common sense. It makes good economic sense. It's good business. We've had this conversation before about the healthcare piece and how in the United States or in the West, our understanding of healthcare is mostly sick care. We wait until there's a problem and then we diagnose the problem and we treat the symptoms. You wait until you have a deficiency and then you give people a pill. You wait until someone injures themselves and then you do physical therapy. It's all retroactive. So we could call that sick care. And people are having this conversation now about how processed our foods are and how unhealthy our diets are. In the West, you have this modern phenomenon of heart disease and hypertension and these illnesses that are killing people that are fully diet related. And that would not have happened if we hadn't have disrupted or disrespected traditional food systems here. Because traditional food systems here take care of the whole person.
When salmon were coming in belly up in piles, the native people were becoming more sick in that area. There was increased rates of hypertension, of heart disease, of high cholesterol. The health of the people, the health of the food, and the health of the ecosystem. Since Indigenous people have had periods of being sick, we have seen the land also be sick along with us. The thing that I find really interesting and funny is that the way that we've set up the economy, our current economic system, acts like it's immune from these parallels. Corporations act like their health is not tied to the health of the land, when it is.
I'm obsessed with your theory of change. I've talked before about how I am so focused right now on surrounding myself with people who are focused on progress, action, and solutions. Yes, in the first place, it is so important to tell these stories because they were suppressed and erased, and there are structural inequalities that are not being addressed because we're lying to ourselves about history. But it's so important for us to also be capable of moving on. Yes, we've explained the problems. Yes, we've told the stories. There's so much more to you as a person than being oppressed. Like, you have such good ideas. And this is perhaps our problem of the people who want the world to be better. And I'm just being very broad with that term because I just want to talk about ideas. I think this is part of my beef with broadly people who want the world to be better is we obsess over problems. And it makes sense. That's an important starting point, is to say this happened, it is still affecting us today, this is a terrible thing. But like, how about joy? How about native culture? How about native leadership and native solutions? You've talked about this before, being invited to give speeches or panels and whatnot, and they just want you to talk about how much your people have suffered.
Yes, people come to me like what I'm asking for them is a charity handout. And I hate that because Native people were not a handout. And Indigenous people don't deserve funding and all these other things because we are helpless and unable to do anything. I ask of investments into Indian country from a pragmatic standpoint. When you're thinking about a job application, you want the person with the most experience doing the job. Indigenous people, we have the experience behind us.
Right.
Native people take care of 80% of the world's biodiversity and get 1% of all funding that comes to climate. That doesn't make sense.
To the same point of what I was saying earlier about the sort of trauma porn, the environmental movement that started in the 70s and has had a couple waves now, really came back in 2018 with like the youth climate movement. It's done a good job at sounding the alarm, but we've left people with a sense of danger without a plan, without an agenda. That's our bad. We need to do a better job at giving people solutions, an agenda, and something to rally around. We need to act now. But we didn't do a good job of explaining what action meant.
The climate movement has done lots of great things, but also Indigenous people have been doing our own thing. I talked to my grandpa about climate.
Or the environment, like environmentalism.
My grandpa lives on the reservation and just got internet access. And I'm like, what climate movement? But the way that like Indigenous people live is, it's not compartmentalized.
The way that we go about this, if we're just trying to solve climate change, is we're going to put solar panels on things. That doesn't solve any of the other problems that we're dealing with. It's just an alternative energy, it's just less emissions. What we need to be doing is looking at this much more holistically. How do you solve this from every angle? One of my central points is that the economy is built on the environment. We've been getting away with for long enough because we've been able to explore more ecosystems, extract more, find more trees to chop down, find more minerals and mines to exploit. We've been able to continually grow in terms of economic activity because we've been leaving behind a trail of disasters in our wake. All these mines that are poisoning the earth, all these forests that have been chopped down. But we're now running up against those limitations. We're now reaching a point where it's going to start affecting their bottom line or their ability to grow. We have not meaningfully addressed climate changes because it's something that you can't, up until now, see or feel. So we don't feel that sense of urgency. Our brains are programmed to only react to the crisis in front of us. But now the crisis is in front of us. And that is why I feel so bullish in this moment. Like, I think the time is coming for this Marshall Plan on solving these deep ecological problems, listening to Indigenous people and taking inspiration from the past on how to build the future. The stakes are high, but that's why we need to be having these big, bold conversations about what leadership and what blueprints we're trying to put forward next. So talk to me about this. I don't think your average American realizes that there are so many independent Native nations. What would it look like for them to be genuinely empowered with treaties honored and also money flowing in?
Tribes have our own governments. We have governments, we have councils, there's tribal presidents, there's tribal council members. People have the infrastructure to lead, it just needs to be funded. What I'm excited about is the fact that Indigenous people are running this shit with a very low budget. That's what investors love to hear. There's 535 plus federally recognized tribes in the United States, and they only get $3 billion from the United States to run all those operations, to just give Native people the chance with any amount of money. I'd like to see it happen on a federal level, mostly because the United States has a federal trust responsibility in the law to let Indigenous people lead as the sovereign nations that they are. And I would like to see more money going straight just to tribes.
In certain counties or cities in the United States, people can voluntarily pay a land tax to the people whose land they live on. Right now, it's mostly structured as an organization where you can donate to, and it's helping Native people buy their land back or support their communities, do ecosystem work, food systems, urban gardens. But what would it look like to see these kinds of frameworks happen on a state level? And in order for this to work, like 0.01% of state taxes go towards a fund for Native investment.
Indigenous people are at our best to lead when we are also healthy. So health for us looks like investing in not just our food systems like I talked about earlier, but investing in our languages, investing in our families, making sure that we have healthcare. When I talk to tribal leaders about like how we can access traditional ecological knowledge, a lot of that exists within our languages that we are connecting back to. So while Indigenous people are chopping at the bit to lead, Indigenous people need to be invested not just to spit out one outcome. We want to create a world where everybody has access to live full, healthy lives, so you have to invest in the full, healthy lives of Indigenous people.